Hello everyone, it's Kelly here. If you've been here before, welcome back. If you're new, you are so welcome. Thank you for stopping by. I'm always happy to have anybody to talk to about books. And today we are chatting my 5-star reads from 2022. So I'm filming this just at the end of December. It's a couple of days after Christmas and I am feeling reflective. I'm thinking about what has been really good about this year, because we all know there's been some challenges. So always good to be thinking about some of the positives as well. And I'm thinking back to my reading year. This has been a really good reading year for me. I've read so many books that I have really enjoyed. And today I'm only going to be talking about the 5 stars. There's 19 of them. 19 books, 19 5-star reads in a year is pretty darn good in my opinion. So I'm pretty happy with that. And that's completely leaving out all of the 4-star reads, which were also awesome, and the 4.5-star reads. So with that, I've had a great year. So let me tell you about some of the books that I've read. I've decided today I am going to talk to you about these books in the order in which I read them. So we're starting very beginning of January 2021 with my very first book. It was actually the first book that I read. So I probably read it on like the 1st or the 2nd of January of 2021. And that is To My Country by Ben Lawson with illustrations by Bruce Watley. So just before the pandemic hit in 2020, as in hit us hard in 2020, we in Australia had just been through the worst bushfire season ever, ever. It was awful. So many fires, so much destruction, lives lost, so many, people's lives disrupted, houses burnt down. It was awful. And an actor who was living abroad at the time, Ben Lawson, wrote a poem because he was watching from afar, watching these bushfires and thinking about the impact on his homeland, because he wasn't there. He wasn't there. He couldn't be there to check in on family and all of those kind of things. And he wrote this poem, which he posted online. I believe he read it in a video online and it went viral. And then he was approached to turn it into a book, which he did. And this was the result. And I guess as the first read of the year, it hit me hard in an emotional way, I guess, because I had heard this poem read at the time, and I just, it just really hit me hard. But yeah, basically it was just, thanking people for their service. And this was like before the pandemic, as in before it got real for us all. And, so we were thanking our firefighters and all of the volunteers and so on that had been so amazing in this emergency that we were going through. And this poem was just beautiful. So that was my first 5-star read of the year. It was a good one to start with. Read number 2 was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. I read this beautiful edition. These are the Penguin Threads editions, which have these gorgeous, almost like embroidered, well, they are embroidered, but it's sort of a textured reprint of an embroidery. And when you look on the back, it's like this, it's like the reverse side of an embroidery, which I think is just gorgeous. Anyway, I've got a couple of these, but this was the first one that I got of that series because I just couldn't go past this cover. It's also got these edges, deckled edges, is that what they're called? Anyway, whatever they're called, it's always so nice because they're so textural. I loved this. I had read a bit of it. I'd certainly seen the movie when I was a kid, that has Colin Firth comes back as the adult version of one of the kids right at the end of the film. And it was like at the height of Pride and Prejudice. So I was like, yeah. However, I hadn't read the book before. So this was, I think, first read through, or at least maybe I tried to read it as a child and hadn't gotten through it. But I loved it. It was just a really beautiful read, and the way that the author wrote these characters, you know, especially characters who are a bit, you know, annoying. Like, they're not nice people necessarily, but it's kind of not their fault because they're children, and it's, you know, they're the product of their environment and how they've been treated and so on. So I think she handled that really, really well. And the character arcs throughout the book are just lovely. And it was a beautiful read. And I still remember finishing this off and just being like, that was just amazing. So a beautiful 5-star read for the beginning of the year, The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. The next book is a completely different type of book, and I don't have a physical copy of it here today. There's a couple on here that I don't have physical copies of because I either read them on my e-reader or I listened to an audiobook version of it. This one I read on my e-reader, and it was Know My Name by Chanel Miller, who was the survivor of the Stanford sexual assault case that was so very public a few years back. I guess it probably goes without saying as to why this is a 5-star read. It's essential reading, in my opinion, for everybody, because I think we all should know what it's like for somebody who is going through not only the trauma of their experience, but then to be re-traumatized and to be traumatized in new ways in navigating the legal system, a system that is definitely set up to protect the guilty party, in this case, you know, the perpetrator of this assault, and not the survivor. So yeah, it's a really important read. But more than that, it's a very readable book as well. I think Chanel Miller is an extraordinary author, and you know, I'd very quickly be picking up anything else she decided to write, not just her personal memoir of that time and what she went through in that experience, because it was very readable and a really good, meaty read. And I definitely, you know, was able to connect with her throughout that, you know, as she was talking about that trauma, and to, you know, really put myself in her shoes. And to, you know, obviously we can never know the full extent of what that experience is unless we experience it ourselves. But to be able to empathize with her and to really understand what's going on inside her mind, and you know, as she's going through all of this horrific court case that went on for such a long time, and how that really affected her life. So must read. Everybody must read this book. It is so good, and so important. Book number 4 is another traumatic read, I guess, because it's talking about some really serious issues, including suicide. It's talking about abuse towards queer people. It's talking about traumatic childhoods and households that are not functional. So there's some really heavy stuff in this book, but it's also, I would say, probably the best book that I've read this year. If I was going to rank them, this would probably be coming out on top, and it's Honeybee by Craig Silvey. This is the story of Sam, and the story begins at an overpass bridge, and that's where Sam meets Vic. Vic is an older man. His wife has passed away, and he is suffering from his own traumas and issues. They're both there to commit suicide. They make eye contact, and that does not happen. They do not commit suicide that night, and it sort of just it kind of follows. So Sam is our main protagonist, and we follow Sam as he sort of navigates this new relationship that he's building with Vic, as well as trying to deal with the unacceptance that he's finding around him, of himself as himself, because he's exploring his sexuality, he's exploring his gender, and he is, you know, at the very beginning of the book, very, very confused and very, very sad. But it's one of those books that just kind of breaks your heart over and over and over again. But I think the undertone of the book is hopeful as well. So it doesn't just break your heart. It also builds you up and makes you a better person, as good books really can. So I really, really recommend Honeybee by Craig Silvey. Such a beautiful read, and definitely something that I think I'd like to see lots and lots of people talking about and reading in the booktube and book reading communities online, because it's such a good book. The next one is another one I don't have a physical copy of. It's Codename Helene, and it's written by Ariel Lawhon. And it's a sort of fictionalized account of the life of Nancy Wake. Nancy Wake was a spy in World War II. She was an Australian woman, but she was married to a Frenchman, I assume, because I don't really... I'm assuming that the kind of base level facts in this book are correct. Like, it's not all just fictionalized. She's married to a Frenchman in the book, and I assume that that's accurate. And living in Paris at the time when World War II breaks out, and sort of this is a fictionalized account of her kind of coming to, you know, how she ends up becoming a spy, and ends up, you know, being a sort of quite critical, go-between in terms of the Allies being able to get supplies into France, to sort of give those supplies to the French, people on the ground, so that they can resist the German occupation. So yeah, it was a really, really interesting book. It's quite long, and I listened to this one as an audiobook, and it was just really gripping. You know, that first bit, you're just kind of getting to know her as a character, and she's, as you kind of imagine, an Australian woman, quite like, you know, upfront, and speaks her mind and so on, which at the time was probably quite unusual for Europeans to be seeing, unless they had travelled to Australia. We're an outspoken people, I will say. So yeah, it was nice to kind of get to know her as a character. And then also, when things started to kick off in terms of the war, it just became this really gripping story of her life, and how you go from being a woman who just lives in Paris with your French husband to a woman who is a spy, kind of standing up to these like really aggressive men. It's mostly men who are fighting and who are involved in these things. There's not very many women around, but how she kind of held her own as a person in that circumstance, which I can only imagine must have been really tough. So it was a really, really gripping story, and yeah, definitely one that I would recommend if you're looking for that kind of tale. Book number 6 is The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. Now this is gorgeous. It was just a beautiful, beautiful book. I believe it would be categorized as a middle grade book, or a junior fiction book, as we would call it in Australia. Basically a book written for children, but not little ones. And essentially it's this story of there's lots of different things that are going on, actually. So you've got the story of this town, and every year, I think it is, at the same time, they believe they need to sacrifice the most recently born child in the town to a witch. And so they do this, and of course, the trauma and the sadness that is sort of prevalent in the town as a result of this is obvious. and then we have a character who is sort of then kind of questioning this because his child ends up being the next potential one. But we follow the girl who drank the moon. It turns out there's actually a good witch that lives in the forest who doesn't understand why this town keep leaving babies at the same time every year. So she goes and she rescues these babies, having no clue what's going on, you know, and why this town would be doing it. And then she rehomes them. They call them the Star Children, and you know, they live these gorgeous lives in this another town that is unconnected with this town. And so it sort of just evolves from there, and you kind of learn more about the witch. And one year when she's doing it, so she feeds the child with starlight, hence Star Children. However, this particular year she ends up not kind of paying attention, and she feeds the child moonlight because it becomes a full moon, I believe, and so therefore the child ends up becoming magical, and so then it's kind of what happens from there. Sorry, if you can see movement, I've got cat going on down here. So just if you're wondering, cat. Okay, so the girl who drank the moon. So it's a beautiful tale. There are some gorgeous characters in it, including I think his name is Glurk, who was probably my favorite character. He's like the bog, like a bog monster essentially, and he's just, oh, I loved him so much. But yeah, it was just a gorgeous book, and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. I have ordered a copy of it, a physical copy, but it hasn't arrived yet, so I'm waiting on that, and I definitely am going to reread that one again at some point. Book number 7 is My Sister the Serial Killer by I'm going to say this wrong, but I'm going to have a go. Oyinkan Braithwaite. So she is, this is a story, I can't actually remember which country this story is set in, but it's an African country. And it's about these two sisters, one of whom is, I guess, you know, the plain, hardworking sister, and then you've got the gorgeous, glamorous sister that kind of seems to just kind of get whatever she wants all the time. And she's sort of this kind of character who is painted as being quite, like, you know, a bit hippy dippy, a little bit like off with the fairies in terms of her own mind, you know, just kind of pursuing whatever she wants and looking amazing and whatever. And then, but it's told from the perspective of the hardworking sister who is called because her sister has killed a man, and then it happens again. And now, as at the beginning of this story, she is there's a man that the sister who is the hardworking one is in love with, and then he meets her sister and falls in love with her sister, and they start to date, and all of a sudden she's just like, oh, this is all, you know, I did the things, I helped my sister with, basically my sister has gotten away with murder multiple times, I cannot let her murder this man. So it's kind of, you know, this really interesting story from that point of view of her kind of making decisions on the fly, you know, the importance of family, but also, you know, when there's a man that she cares about involved, and you know, sort of like the breakdown of her mind and her, you know, the family dynamics, this kind of like suppression that they've all kind of been living under since their father died when they were younger, because he was hot and he was a horrible dad. So, you know, it was kind of this like this cycle that kind of kept playing out between these two sisters, and it's like you know, the dynamics of it are just fascinating. So it was a really, really interesting book. Not too long. I can't remember. I listened to this as an audiobook, and I don't think it was more than, say, 4 or 5 hours, somewhere in that vicinity. But it was like a really, really compelling book to listen to. Really, really well narrated, and I highly recommend it. The next one was a real heartbreaker. Clearly you can see a bit of a pattern going on here. First with Honeybee and now with this. The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I know if you've read it, you know it's just heartbreaking. It builds you up, and then it breaks your heart, and then it builds it up again, and then it breaks it again. It's just amazing. It's an amazing, amazing book, and I won't spend too much time talking about it because there are plenty of people talking about this book all over the internet. But it's amazing. You should read it if you love a retelling of a classical mythology. It's also an LGBTQI plus story. We've got characters who, so 2 men who have what I think is just a really beautiful love story. And like, you know, you are, as you're reading this story, you are wanting for them to succeed and for things to turn out well for them, and so on. And it's just heartbreaking but beautiful, and please read it. It's amazing. I also listened to this one on audiobook, so I'd highly recommend that too. It certainly was really great to listen to. I will say, however, there are some bits in it that are a little bit explicit, so just be aware of that and where you're listening to it, if that's out loud and not in your headphones. And also, you know, how straight a face can you keep while you're listening to that sort of thing. So something to keep in mind, but it was a very, very good book. The next book is Natives by Akala, and the full title of it is Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire. So I had heard Akala on a panel for something. I'm not actually sure what it was. I watched a video clip of him talking on this panel, and he is such an articulate, intelligent man who just expresses things so beautifully, but also in a way that is really understandable to people. So if you are looking for a book that explores the impact of sort of the colonial mindset, and also considering you know, the sort of intersection of different things that have come about because of that, and because of that mindset, then this is definitely the book for you. It's really, really interesting. I learned a lot from listening to it, and I also just really appreciated the how accessible it was as a book about a challenging topic, and something that that certainly people should read about and should learn more about. I would really, really recommend this one. It's really, really good. The next one was one that was a little bit unexpected for me in terms of it being a 5-star read. And that is, I'm going to have to read this off the cover because it is a very, very long title. Important Artifacts and Personal Property from the Collection of Lenore Doolan and Harold Morris, including books, street fashion and jewelry. Saturday, 14 February 2009, New York. So this is by Leanne Shapton. And essentially what she's done, and you can see that this is this fictional couple. Essentially she's done it like it's an auction catalogue. So basically you've got these sort of like different lots, and like it's going to be an auction, and they've got like price guides for things. But essentially what this is a kind of really out of left field look at the deterioration of a relationship. So, you know, a relationship that begins, you know, in a positive way and lasts for a little bit, and then kind of fizzles out for one reason or another, you know, incompatibility or you know, whatever. And it actually, you know, at first it's kind of just quirky, and you're just kind of reading through these things, you know, and it's got things like a handwritten note and envelope, which is lot 1027. A note on St. Regis Stationery in Doolan's hand reads, please join me in room 1045 XL. And it's got, you know, the size and price guide, you know, and a fortune cookie kept by Morris in his wallet reading, in life, it's good not to get too comfortable. So it's, you know, just sort of these quirky items. And then it's kind of, but the way that it's structured, it kind of goes through their relationship from start to finish, and sort of, you know, shows them going into these periods of doubt and arguments that they've had and disagreements and so on. So yeah, it's just a really, really fascinating look at the deterioration of a relationship via objects that they had kept or that were kind of representative of that relationship. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, definitely seek this out because it's really good. We now get into the portion of this video where we are starting to talk about books that I have mentioned on this channel. So all of the ones that we've previously been talking about, I read before I had started this channel. So now we're going to talk about some ones that I read and have talked about here. And the first one is, of course, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. So we're up to book number 11 on my list of 19. I have read this before several times now. I think the first time I read it was in high school when I was studying it. But then I subsequently have read it and I love it every time. It's such a good story. And now that I've read all but one of Austen's other published novels, I also have to say it's the least problematic of them all. Sense and Sensibility is also not as problematic either, but some of the other ones are just, I don't know. There's some elements in there that do not translate well across the ages. So yeah, this has always been my favorite, and so far it remains the same. I've still got one to go that I'm going to be reading in January, so we'll have to wait and see. The next one is The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. I loved this. It's a what would you call this? What these things are has escaped my mind right now, but it's gorgeous. I've spoken about this previously, how much I love it. It's a beautiful story about a girl who, her mother is a blacksmith, and she sort of is learning to be a blacksmith, but it turns out she has a bit of a talent for nurturing these creatures that are called tea dragons, and sort of cultivating, so they grow the herbs essentially to make the tea. So that sort of ends up becoming more of her path. But along the way, she ends up meeting these really fascinating characters. So we've got one character who sort of is like a tea master. We've got his assistant, who turns out also to be his partner, his romantic partner. And we also have a girl who has some sort of lost memories, but who becomes her friend. So it's sort of this found family, but not from a place of brokenness, more from, you know, she has a good home and a good family who love her. And, you know, so she has family, but she also has this found family of these people who have kind of common goals and common interests. And it's absolutely beautiful. I'd highly recommend it. It's very, very short, a very quick read, but it's absolutely lovely. And I'd highly recommend that you go and find yourself a copy. The next one is Morris by E.M. Forster, that I read earlier this year. It is another LGBTQI plus book, bit of a theme going on in my 5-star reads, I have to say. But it is a really, it was an interesting one. It was probably the first time this has happened for me, because often I find when a character is unlikable, or if, you know, the sort of main characters are unlikable, I find it really hard to get into the book. I did not like a single character in this book. They're all awful, but I really, really loved this book. I really got into the story. I found it so fascinating, you know, watching their lives and the decisions that they're making. And I also I really wanted things to work out for Morris, you know, despite the fact that he's just not a very nice person. I still found myself kind of like hoping that things would go well for him. So that was interesting for me as a reader, but it's also a really, really good, book, and immensely readable. And I would certainly seek this out if you haven't read it before. I'm definitely going to look into reading some more of E.M. Forster in 2022 because I just enjoyed this so much. We're getting towards the end here. We're up to number 14 now, and it is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. This was a big surprise for me. Although I have a physical copy of it, I listened to this as an audiobook. It's very short, but it was really compelling, and the storytelling was just impeccable. So if you're looking for a short read that is really enjoyable, you know, we all know the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, but actually listening to it in the words of the original author, I felt was a really positive experience and something I'd highly recommend to others. Number 15 was Islands of Decolonial Love by Leanne Bettasamasaki Simpson. I also listened to this as an audiobook, and I really, really loved listening to it. The audiobook narrator was amazing, and really kind of helped me to kind of as someone who is not from this group of people, to really understand, you know, what the author was trying to get across, but also to sort of get my head into that space of listening to stories that are told, and so it's stories and songs. So stories and songs that are told in a way that is not familiar to me. So the author is from a First Nations group of people who I believe are sort of Canada based. And she has done a brilliant job of telling these stories, and really it sort of is almost like a series of stories that are not connected, but you feel the connection via the culture and via sort of the way that the characters kind of interact with one another and tell their story as well. So it's really beautiful, and I'd really highly recommend it to anyone, and definitely recommend the audiobook because it's amazing. The next one is The Year the Maps Changed by Danielle Binks. I listened to this one as an audiobook too, and it was a bit of a random one, so not one that I was necessarily planning on reading, but it looked interesting, and I looked at how much time it was. I was like, yeah, I can do that I can fit that one in, and it turned out to be an amazing discovery. I loved this book. It was so good, and it's all about this. It's told from this perspective of a girl who is living in a sort of small town in Australia, and she is kind of grappling with some stuff with her family. So her birth mother has died, and she now lives with her adopted father, as in so he was married to her mother, and he adopted her, went through the process of adopting her, and then but also she lives with her mum's dad, so her grandfather, and so then he is about to remarry, and so she's sort of dealing with that kind of stuff as a kid. You know, she's sort of about 11 or 12, I suppose, and she the woman that he's marrying has a son who is a year below her, and in Australia, I don't know if this happens elsewhere quite frequently, but we often have composite classes where you've got 2 grades in one, especially if you've got either a small school or you might have that's the way the numbers fall in terms of the kids who are at the school. So you have to form a composite class. So they end up being in a composite class together, this future brother and sister. And yeah, so she's sort of navigating her own personal stuff. But at the same time, there is a refugee crisis, and the Australia ends up taking some of these refugees, but it's quite controversial. In certain people disagree with it. The same stuff that happens now, like it's where you've got these people who are vocally against taking refugees, because they don't think they should be coming, and all of those kind of things. It's still those attitudes that are still prevalent now, although this was set, I believe, in the 90s. So these refugees come, and so then it's kind of and they're placed in a facility that is quite close to this small town. So it's kind of the impact of that on the small town, and these kids kind of starting to feel the injustice of some of the attitudes that some people have, and so on. And it's just beautifully told. Geography is this real thread through the whole story, and it's just a really beautifully told tale. She's a really innocent character. She's a child, but I think the author has just done such a good job of making that innocence not annoying. It's realistic innocence, but it's not irritating innocence that you sometimes find in a book where an author just kind of overdoes it. Not so in this one. It was just really well written, and such a poignant tale that it was an instant 5-star for me, and it's probably up there with Honeybee as being one of my favorite reads of this year. We're getting to the end now. We're up to number 17. This next one is She of the Mountains by Vivek Shraya. This was another unexpected 5-star read for me. Another one where I was like, oh, that's short on audiobook. Sure, we've got time for this. Let's load it up. And it turned out to be amazing. So I have purchased subsequently this physical copy because I wanted to have a look at the illustrations that are throughout the story as well. So this is one that's told in two voices, essentially. So we've got one narrative that is a retelling or a reimagining of kind of ancient tales, and then you've also got a modern story of a man who is kind of coming to accept himself as he is, and the kind of those stories are interwoven, even though they are 2 separate stories. So it's just I can't explain to you. You just have to experience it for yourself, because it's absolutely amazing. Again, I would recommend the audiobook because it was really, really good. And definitely seek this one out if you haven't already. Number 18 was a reread for me. It is The Queen's Nose by Dick King-Smith. I spent a lot of time talking about this on another video. I loved it. It's a book that I read in my school library when I was in primary school. So it would have been about maybe 8, 9, 10, somewhere in that vicinity. And I loved it back then. I sought out a copy some years later, but I never got round to rereading it until I reread it this year. And I still loved it. It was great. Dick King-Smith is such a good author. He wrote The Sheep Pig, which became the movie Babe, which I also loved. And I've read The Sheep Pig. It's also amazing. So I definitely think he is a real master storyteller. And I definitely want to read some more of his books, perhaps next year. We'll see how we go. My very last 5-star read for this year actually only happened on Christmas Eve. My husband and I listened to an audiobook version of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And the audiobook that I found was narrated by Sir Patrick Stewart, and it was a delight. We both really enjoyed it very, very much. And it was a great performance. I will say it is abridged, so I still haven't read the full story of A Christmas Carol. We'll save that perhaps for next Christmas. But it was really good. I mean, it's one of those stories, again, much like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that in our culture we know about because it's such a classic, but to actually read, or listen to the words of the author. I have tried to read Charles Dickens before and have not enjoyed it. So I'm now just thinking maybe I have to find the right Dickens, because I really, really, really liked this one. So I think I might look at some other Charles Dickens books that were written in that same period of his writing, because perhaps I was reading some from a different period of his writing. I don't know. A Tale of Two Cities, I feel like I tried to read at one point, or Hard Times. Is that him? It's probably him. Anyway, didn't enjoy it. But I loved this one, and it was a definite 5 stars. And I don't know how much Sir Patrick Stewart had to do with that, because he certainly did do an excellent performance. But also I found myself kind of, laughing at the wit of the story as well as we were going along, and sort of the bargaining that our main character does with these ghosts who come to visit him to help him kind of change his life before it's too late. So yeah, it was really, really enjoyable and a very nice way to kind of round out the year. Well, that's it from me today. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I have really, really loved what has come about because of starting this channel, and I'm really thankful to all of you who have followed along on my journey and have read along with me, have commented, have chatted to me about books in different forums. For those of you who follow me on Instagram and all of those things, thank you so much for making this kind of last quarter of the year so enjoyable for me and helping me to find my feet in this environment that is a little bit unfamiliar to me. So thank you, and I hope that 2022 is also going to bring about some amazing reading. Hopefully I'll be able to match or get a higher number of 5-star reads in 2022, but we'll have to wait and see. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you had a fantastic Christmas, and all the best for 2022.